having me. My name is Brent Turner, and for anybody that doesn't know me, I do civil rights work around the Bay Area, state of California, and nationally on the issue of election system integrity. And our work is to make sure that there are solution systems coming forward for the crisis of elections that we're currently suffering in the United States. I'm sure everybody in this moment is aware, if they weren't aware before a couple days ago, that here in the United States we have a tremendous difficulty counting votes for some reason. We don't seem to have good management of our counties and jurisdictions when it comes to vote counting. And of course, this is an issue that is fairly complicated and voluminous, but it can be broken down into very simple pieces. Let's see if I can do it with no preparation and no script. What I think is best is I'll give you just a overview, and then if anybody has any questions, we can focus on particular issues that you might find to be topical. It's a wide range of issues attached to election integrity, but I think in today's language, if we break it into disenfranchisement and separate between what I would call front-end disenfranchisement and then back-end disenfranchisement. Front-end disenfranchisement would be obviously gerrymandering and disallowing somebody in a Jim Crow fashion from voting. So this would be closing down poll sites, minimizing the voter's ability to vote conveniently, and creating veritable poll taxes by causing the person that was hoping to vote to expend money, finances in order to vote. This could be accomplished by simply voter ID laws, moving the voting precinct or the place of voting to another place far away that would make someone take a bus or have to have a car or inconvenience to the point of not voting. That would be all examples of what we would call front-end disenfranchisement. And I think people are fairly familiar with those sorts of activities. What people may not really contemplate so much is what we would call back-end disenfranchisement, and that would be when a person thinks they've actually accomplished the task of voting, but then there is a miscounting of their vote, either a failure to count their vote after they've cast it, or counting that vote incorrectly by flipping it maybe to another candidate, so that when you think you're voting for Smith, your vote is accepted, but it's actually tabulated for Jones, to reference the simplistic. So that particular devastating reality is something that we have known to be in existence. The probability or likelihood or availability of what is commonly termed a hack, that the voting system would be hacked into. Now, when we talk about hacks, a person could hack into the front-end database, which would be the voter rolls, and knock people off the rolls, maybe changing them from a known voter to something unknown, so that then the voter would have to vote provisionally and then that vote may or may not be counted in a timely fashion. Or if a hacker wanted to hack the main part of the system, unfortunately, the current protections around the system are insufficient to protect the United States voting systems from the power of a foreign interference agent that would have the ability to utilize the assets of a nation state to attempt such a hack. So there's a great concern amongst the technologists in the United States, and there has been for many years, since basically 2000 and maybe before, that we need to protect ourselves and that we're not doing that. In 2005, we, in the United States, changed the voting systems to an electronic system that was funded by a federal program called the Help America Vote Act, where $4.5 billion worth of electronic voting systems were purchased by the counties. And the vendors, which were a small group of vendors, scurried quickly to tender through the vendors systems that were not properly thought and were not well thought out. And there was a great amount of objection to those systems, and we see those currently in use with what's called the voter verified paper audit trail and these different systems. Some have no paper at all, like we see in Georgia. And the problem is that the software that runs these systems, not only is the architecture poor, and not only do they have problems with their paper component, but they have a Microsoft platform which is very buggy and available to hacking, as well as vendor software code, which is private to the vendor selling the system. So the problem is there's very few people that actually know what's going on inside these systems, and it is kept secret from the general public. So we've seen a case called Christine Jennings that is precedent for the fact that you cannot subpoena the software. The people have no right to see what's actually going on inside the systems, and these systems are the same systems that are in Georgia and Florida and Ohio are right here in San Francisco. So basically, in a nutshell, the idea is we need to immediately take these intellectual property software systems and dispose of them for the safety of the democracy and replace them with what's called open source software paper ballot systems. The good news is this is not rocket science for technologists. This is simply achieved and has been achieved in demonstration form and is almost 100% achieved currently in New Hampshire. And New Hampshire is running an open source voting system for its voter interface, its disabilities components, but unfortunately not for the main component, the tabulation piece. In New Hampshire, they're still running private software for that particular purpose. Travis County, Texas, attempted a 100% open source project. Unfortunately, the vendor backed people that inhabit this space. They showed up to participate in the Texas project, and that project was driven into the ground. So it didn't sustain. Los Angeles has burned through right now about, I don't know, $20–30 million probably in their pursuit of an open source voting system. But again, the project has been taken off its high ground path by folks that basically purport to be open source advocates, but turn out to be representing vendor interests, so that the project, again, in Los Angeles was taken away from being what we would call a legitimate open source voting project, and we think it's in a failed state right now. So the last place in the country that is really going to show the rest how it's done properly is San Francisco County. Now we have seen the county allocate $2 million toward the beginning of the open source voting system for San Francisco, which, if certified, can become the go-to system for the state of California, and then that would hopefully carry forth to the rest of the United States. The reason why it is likely to carry forth to the rest of the United States is not so much what we thought, that everybody would jump for joy to secure our elections against nefarious activity, but actually more market-driven, because in fact these same systems that are more secure are less expensive, and everybody is clamoring for a less expensive way to get out the door for less money. So we use that as a motivator, but we have to understand that we're up against the biggest forces in the universe for this, because first of all, as you can imagine, there's some very, very bad dark force people that don't want elections to be secure for whatever reasons. And also Microsoft, and as my friend, former CIA Director Jim Woolsey eloquently states, those who bob in their wake, in the wake of Microsoft, those who follow behind them, they don't like the idea of open source, because that's a public free software that basically pulls the thread of their cheap suit and exposes them for selling crappy software and vendor locking all the jurisdictions across the country. So the Department of Defense and others know that there's a better method. NASA uses open source, Department of Defense, so on and so forth. But we're having trouble garnering the political will, because Microsoft donates extensively to everybody, and there's nobody from the NAACP to the ACLU to the counties to the this, that. There's nobody that Microsoft doesn't touch one way or another. So it's been very difficult, but luckily San Francisco is the shining light for this issue. And we believe, especially now with the daily news showing that all these systems are in meltdown, and we can't get a proper vote count when it really matters, when it really gets crunchy and tight. So we feel like this can happen and that we can solve this problem. The science is there. Really, we just have to make sure our county legislature in California, Phil Ting, people that hold the purse strings, that they're ponying up matching funds from the state to subsidize San Francisco to make our robust system as quickly as possible, and then from there we'll be able to move forward with this work. And I hope that that explains some of the background here. I just want to make one more point, and then I'll ask for questions, and that is, there used to be folks that were called hand counters, and these folks were very adamant that they did not want any technology involved in vote counting. And they actually had good reason in their heart for their objection to technology, but it was not a realistic position, because we knew that we're never, once technology comes into a space, it doesn't go back out. We're never going to see the voting machines fly away or technology leave the space, but what we can do is attack the technology and make sure it's not controlled by corporations. There's also a carryover from these same hand counters where they're very staunch on paper ballots. We advocate for paper ballots, but we always want to couple the paper ballot conversation with the software conversation. There's a propensity for wise guys that gain this space to talk about paper ballots, but they leave the software part out, and that is condemnable and makes us suspicious that some of these folks that are calling out for the paper ballot and leaving out the software component, that they may be in fact gaming as activists, because they have to understand, and they can't really plead ignorance to the fact there is a software component to this counting, and if you don't address it, if you just have a paper ballot system that utilizes proprietary software, you're in the same schism that we are seeing play out today. This is the reason you can't get a proper vote count in Florida, and by the way, you can't get a proper recount either. And this is the same that would happen if we had a real tight race in San Francisco. Currently with our systems, they're no different. The system would implode. And so we just have to replace these systems. And London Breed and Malia Cohen and the supervisors, this work started with Chris Daly and Tom Amiano, and we've been persistent, as Denise knows, for the last 10 years, very vigilant, making sure San Francisco is the pride for the country. And I think we're almost there. Linda Jarrell, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight from the Department of Technology, is heading up the effort. And with that, I'll ask if there's any questions that I might be able to answer. Please.
We keep hearing, at least it was online, that in Georgia, Kemp has managed to manipulate the Georgia ballot, where a lot of people were voting, they would mark their ballot for a Democrat, and the machine would read it as Republican.
Right.
One of the things they tried to do with this recount was to accurately read them, so all Democratic votes were counted as Democrats, and all Republican votes were counted as Republicans. I'm wondering, how would the program you're talking about sort of alleviate that issue?
Well,
if you could.
Absolutely. Well, the first part is that the flip that you see on the screen. So you vote Smith and you press Smith, and the box won't light up for Smith. It keeps going over to Jones. We consider that to be sloppy. That's just slop coming from the vendor in the fact that they made a lousy machine. That wouldn't be where you would logically intentionally flip a vote. You wouldn't allow the voter to see that there was a lack of integrity to the system. If you were a wise guy, you would, when they pressed Smith, it would reflect Smith, but the vote would just count Jones behind the screen. So there's really no reason that you would have that occur unless you were just sloppy with your architecture, and that's probably what that is. It's just a bad machine. It could be actually malfunctioning, or it could have some malintent there, but really a bad guy would more likely just make the vote flip behind the screen so that the voter would walk away thinking they had achieved Smith, but really it was Jones. So we don't really know what's going on there. That's just a crap system. Regarding the recount part of it, one thing that we want to make sure of when we talk about our system, advocated system, is that the voter's experience should be, when you go and vote for Smith, a printed ballot comes out and it says Smith right on the ballot, and then that ballot goes into the ballot box, and so you're assured that your vote is now counted properly, at least to that point where it's gone into the ballot box. The public would be invited back for a public counting session at the end of the day, and in a perfect world, precincts would be counted in complete public view previous to transportation of the ballot, and if we had 1,000 ballots to be counted, everybody in that precinct before we left the room would know good and well that that 1,000 ballots were counted properly. And the way you do that is through projection on a big screen and holding up the ballot and announcing it, and then running it through an open source scanner, and as it runs through, it projects on a big screen what was just handheld and announced. So it's veritably a hand counting process that utilizes the scanner and utilizes the technology that's available, and it's the best of both worlds.
What if there's a bug in the software?
Then,
Thank you.
well, if there's a bug in the software, then when you held it up and you said Smith and ran it through the scanner, it would say Jones on the screen, and everybody throws their arms up and says, wait a second, that miscounted. So there's a real-time counting component to it. The reality is most counties centrally tabulate, so you don't get the benefit of doing it the way I just described. There's a central tabulation, but your options are either you do it the way the open source technology community says to do it, with public software, with a strict chain of custody, and everybody, many eyes on the code looking for bugs, or you do it the way we're doing it right now, which is nobody gets to see the software, and you just have to hope that it's all happening correctly. So those are your options when people try to dispute the benefit of an open source software system. They have to realize that your alternative is a secret corporate-owned software system. And I think we can all stipulate that obviously we would prefer transparency to a closed system. Please.
In 2016 election, the voters were told they have two options. You can vote for Hillary Clinton, or you can vote for Donald Trump. And the demographic that was least likely to accept that dichotomy was white males.
Okay. Any other questions?
Can they hack into a voting machine just as easily as, say, a computer run with a Microsoft browser?
I think it's childishly simple, which is unfortunate. As a matter of fact, I think at the hackathon in Vegas that they had a 12-year-old just to demonstrate, and you know, it wasn't in apples to apples, so they're exploiting the environment a little bit, but it goes to say these systems are not capable of defending themselves, and not only that, in the community, and I'm speaking as a layperson, you assume that the hacker is going to be successful, and your next goal is to defend once the hacker has made entry. Well, with the current systems there, that's a non sequitur, because there's no way to tell bugs that are inside and what's gone on there. With the open source system, you would see the bug, which is the advantage. Another advantage is you're basically disrupting the vendor from being in the mix, and these vendors are the ones that are really carrying a lot of the bugs. A lot of people are concerned that to say, well, make sure you're not hooked up to the internet, and I think that goes without saying at this point. You would not want any of these systems anywhere near the internet, but the problem is these vendors are hooked up to the internet and then carry the infection forward when they come in to work with the Department of Elections. So this is a major issue that is upgraded with the use of a public system. You are in a better defense position. Please.
Yeah, now I've hung around a lot of Linux users groups and a few other things, And yeah, you are right. The internet is almost run on Apache, which is open source. The thing about proprietary is it is legally defended by copyright. If I'm not, and what happens is if anybody wants to look at the code, the vendors and they yell and scream. This is a corporation protected code, and you can't even see the code. That's their whole thing. And the Linux systems, they're all open, and I remember when it came out, they said there's 300,000 coders behind this system, and and they are like volunteers, I've run, I use some very easy systems, myself, and it's true, it's faster, cheaper.
Yes. Yeah, the conversation, I think has been completed regarding the argument between open source and proprietary code. I refer people to the Department of Defense and the think tanks behind the Department of Defense to say, if you really want to get into a nuts and bolts conversation, take a look at their position. They're, I think, astute, and so is NASA on this issue. So we don't want corporations in our voting systems, obviously. We just certainly do not want that. It's been catastrophic. It's done perhaps irreparable damage to the United States already, and I don't think any of us want that to continue. If we can upgrade the security around the vote counts, let us do that immediately, and let us not let a lack of political will or political corruption get in the way of expediting the solution.